Yeah, good evening, all.
Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you for coming. My name is Max Smith, and I am the Vice President for Democracy for New York City. I've known a lot of you in this room for quite a long time, and for those I've met tonight, I look forward to working with you in the future in this wonderful world of New York politics. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce our special guest speaker tonight. If I could sum up one word for Howard Dean in his career, I think the proper word would be trailblazer. He's definitely been a pioneer. It started with a wildly successful stint as governor of the great state of Vermont, and it continued. He started by becoming a nominee for the presidential campaign in 2004, and he forever transformed Democratic politics in the process. And rather than stopping there, he continued. He went on to form Democracy for America, which allowed the DFNYC to continue to organize and find a place to advocate, and it also inspired many wonderful groups around the country, including our very own Democracy for New York City. From there, he went on to, after DFA, he went on to become the chair of the Democratic National Committee in 2005. And as it was alluded to earlier, he implemented the now famous 50-state strategy. Which definitely changed the game as we knew it. Obviously, no one thought at the time that it was wise to put resources into certain red districts and red states. They're like, why bother? But he definitely was vindicated in the process when we took back the House and Senate in 2006. His influence has gone on in his campaign. He definitely pioneered certain principles, internet fundraising, grassroots organizing, brought him into the modern campaign system, and it was influential in the re-election of our current president, Barack Obama. And so his influence has continued to last. He has continued to energize the left in this country, and his influence, like I said, continues on today. It is with my great pleasure, my honor to introduce Governor Howard Dean.
I'm really tempted to let loose with a list of states, but we're not going to do that. Well, my evening has been made for a bunch of reasons. First of all, Kate Linker is the much younger sister of a guy who I went to school with and graduated from high school with in 1966. So Kate, where's Kate? Where's Kate? Kate? Thank you for doing it. Thank you. This is great. Secondly, there is a person here who was, actually there's a number of people here who are actually at Bryant Park, which was the huge ending of the Sleepless Summer Tour. We went over $1 million. And I don't have a lot of use for the Washington folks, but the other day I ran into a staffer that I know who's been there for a long time, and she said everybody was glued to their seats in Washington watching the thing, the bat go up, 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 up. And so I guess we scared them anyway. Although the more favorite story is the ham sandwich story, which most of you know. But the real thing that I wanted to set the record straight on is that, in fact, I did not pioneer internet fundraising or anything of this sort. The genius of our campaign was we let a bunch of people who at the time were about 23 years old run the campaign and do as they see fit. And so I actually, the only thing that we did that was really smart was actually listen to these people like Zephyr and others, although I don't think Zephyr was quite 23 at the time. Although Andrew will have her in court next week trying to prove to see if she was actually... I'm neutral, promise I am. And this is actually going to make some sense when I finish my talk, but the impact of the campaign was really about empowering people including a bunch of people my age who had dropped out of politics during the Vietnam era and given up, but also empowering a lot of people who were 20 years old and getting into politics for the first time. And we gave them an enormous amount of freedom because we believed in them. And one of my best early memories of the campaign was walking down the street with Kate O'Connor. And by the way, anybody who hasn't read her book should. Never buy Game Change because it's really historical fiction. You ought to read Kate's book called, what was it? It's some enormously long title.
It was great. It's Kate's book.
It's Kate's book. It's something about what I learned on the Howard Dean campaign or something, but she was sort of running it. The reason it's a great book is not that it's a great work of art, it just shows what a real campaign is like, and not the Elizabeth Edwards took her shirt off on the runway, which probably never happened. And it's all, those books are all unsourced and all this crap. But Kate wrote the story the way it really was, and you're all in it. So you ought to go buy the book. She wouldn't put an index in because she knows only Washington people do that because their publishers make them. Because my book was actually a bestseller, my campaign book was a bestseller only in Washington because the publisher made me put an index in. And in Washington, everybody runs to the bookstore, opens it up, and if their name is in the index, then they buy the book. I'm not making this stuff up, right? So the real strength of the campaign was, I don't want you to forget this because the campaign is still going on. The reason Democracy for America exists is because at the end of the campaign after Wisconsin, when I dropped out, we realized that we first realized that, of course, we weren't running against the Republicans at all. We were running against the Democrats who kept voting for all Bush's stuff. And we thought we ought to have a two-party country again. But the other thing we realized is this was a movement. It really was a movement to take back the country from forces of all sorts that did not have the best interests of the country at heart. The right wing, which has shown over the years that they're much more interesting in running the country than they are in the country itself. And if you have to win by preventing people from exercising the right to vote, then you probably shouldn't be in politics. So this was really a campaign about taking power back into the lives of ordinary people. And in fact, that is who actually has the power. The problem was at the time, they didn't believe it. And they did during that time of the campaign. I think it's been a rocky road since. But if you look at, it's always fashionable to bash the president or bash the mayor because when they get there, they're not quite as liberal as everybody thought they were. But having sat in those seats, if you'd talk to Zephyr can tell you this, if you had sat if you'd been a liberal in Vermont in 1992, a year after I took over, you would have been one of the people who were trying to get me out of office and start a primary. Remember that, Zephyr? Zephyr did not sign the petition, I know, because I memorized the 500 names of the people who did. And they never got an appointment. But it's hard to govern, and I think it's okay, and it's a good thing to have our disagreements with the mayor and the president or whomever, all those people who really represent and what we really fundamentally believe in. And I think we also need to give them some slack once in a while, but we also need to remind them that there are some things that really matter, such as getting rid of stop and frisk. That really matters. Because for those of you who've read Michelle Alexander's book, which I consider to be one of the most important books in the last 25 years, we are creating an entire underclass of kids by this stupid policy which arrests people for pot and then makes them unemployable in the above-ground economy for the rest of their lives. So there's fundamental change that needs to happen. We cannot lose sight of the fundamental change. And that's the difference between a movement and a campaign. A campaign is about getting somebody elected, and it matters who we elect. And I'm thrilled to be here for DFNYC because there are people who need to be elected and people who need to run and they may not get elected, but the fact that they're running is going to move the needle and create the discussions that need to be had about these issues. But I also think that we're not going to expect our leaders to do the right thing, as in our version of the right thing, 150% of the time. And when they do, yes, we need to bring it up, but B, we also need to remember that these days, Bill de Blasio and Barack Obama are never going to be Republicans, and we should remind that. I once in a while see people at our end of the spectrum saying, well, they're all corporatists. That is not true. If you want to see a corporatist, I'll show you thousands of them in Washington. They don't look anything like Barack Obama. So that's message number one. I am determined to win this, and we are going to win this. I was talking to a doctor today who said, who's a very, very good doctor, but doesn't pay a lot of attention to politics. And he said, what the hell are we going to do? The world is falling apart. Look what's going on. I said, yeah, and it probably will get worse before it gets better, but it's going to get better. And the reason it's going to get better is that not just here, but in the Middle East and in Iran and in China and all these hotspots all over the world, there are tons and tons of kids. The people here call them millennials. I call them first global. It's the first generation in the history of the world that sees themselves as citizens of the world, and they have a deep, abiding desire to have not just democracy, but to have individual liberty and freedom and the ability to make decisions for themselves. That is not. Rand Paul claims he's a libertarian. I never heard of a libertarian who thought it was okay for him to make up his mind what happens in a woman's reproductive life. He is a total phony. You know, so there is this enormous global movement in this generation to change everything. I was actually doing a book about the first globals, a term, by the way, for the sake of all so I don't get accused of what Walsh got accused of in Montana, a term I stole from John Zogby, who is a Republican pollster, who wrote a book about first globals, which I didn't think was that good. So I was actually going to write a book about first globals with the first global, who unfortunately for me got a job as correspondent from Buenos Aires for The Economist, which was great for her, but not so good for the book. But I did an enormous amount of research, and one of the groups I interviewed was the people who did Tahrir Square, all of whom were about the same age as the kids that did our campaign. And you know, I watched the extraordinary story and heard a lot of really hysterical stories about how they got it done. And then, of course, the great sadness of first the Muslim Brotherhood coming in and beginning the repression, and then finally, of course, the army coming in and being really repressive. And I've been in touch with these guys over this time, and we Skype once in a while, and I said, you know, how do you feel? And when Morsi came in and started getting repressive, they said, you know, the second generation of the Muslim Brotherhood we can talk to. They talk like us. They dress like us. They don't believe everything we believe, and we don't believe, but we can work together. And I think that's true. That's how the first global generation sees it. And I called him recently when al-Sisi came to power, and this guy is a quintessential optimist, but it's pretty hard to be optimistic in Egypt with that going on, especially after they fought so hard to get rid of that. And I said, what now? And he said, we're going to win. And we're going to win because our people all over the world, our age group, our generation all over the world, insists on democracy and the right to build a better country free of repression. And I think that's true. And if that's the one thing I want you to remember, that this is a worldwide fight. It's a fight against the repression of individual, not just individual liberties, but a communal ethos that's bigger than we are. And that's really what was put together by the 23-year-olds in my campaign, was this notion that there's something bigger than us, and it was bigger than the campaign. It was an entire way of looking at the world that's different. We did a lot of polling when I was at the DNC, and about, probably 8 years ago now, as most of you know, I got 0 votes from anybody inside the Beltway to get to the DNC job. Fortunately, there were 377 people outside the Beltway and 75 inside the Beltway, and not one of them wanted me. So when I got in, it was great. I canned all the consultants from Washington that we'd been paying a fortune to tell us how to lose every 4 years and how to be Republicans. And I hired a 35-year-old African-American named Cornell Belcher, who modestly called his polling outfit Brilliant Corners. And the reason I hired him, he was the first Democrat I ever met who understood that Democrats were values voters. Republicans figured it out long ago, but Democrats, we all think we're issues voters. Our issues are our way of talking about values, because we're so intellectual and so well educated. We all, oh no, we don't vote on our emotion, we vote on, we do not, we do so, we're human beings, right? So we're sitting, and the chief of staff was a Pentecostal minister. In fact, her father from Brooklyn, Herb Daughtry, was a very well-known civil rights activist, and Leah Daughtry was the chief of staff. So we're sitting around the office one time, and we're talking about red letter Christianity. If any of you are in the black church, red letter Christianity are those Christians who believe that the word of Jesus is everything, and the actual teachings of Jesus himself, what he actually said, not what he was reported to have said by somebody else, are in red letters. So if you only look at the red letters in a red letter Christian's Bible, you would suspect that Jesus was a Democrat, or at least certainly most likely a progressive anyway, right? Even though he may have been nonpartisan. So we're looking at this stuff, and I said, you know, why is it that evangelicals are not Democrats? Why can't we talk to them? So Cornell, of course, says, well, let's do a poll. So he goes out in the field and he polls 2,000 evangelical Christians, and he divides them into two groups, those over 55 and those under 35. And those over 55, you can imagine what the two big issues were: gay rights and abortion rights. And that was just the end for that group. They were just all cranked up about that. You know what the two most important issues for evangelical Christians under the age of 35 was? Number one, poverty. Number two, climate change. Wow. These are evangelical Christians. And I had cornered a couple of them at one point, not that we polled, because obviously that's anonymous, and I'm sort of quizzing them about their beliefs, and they said, you know, well, I'm absolutely against abortion. We don't think abortion is right. And then he looks at me and says, but I don't think I ought to tell my neighbor what to do. And I went, I think we call that pro-choice, don't we? So there, in this generation, there is an incredible will. You know, I'm a culture warrior, of course. I'll go down fighting to the end for the 20% of the stuff that we really have strong disagreements about. But they're not. They believe that we ought to work on the 80% of the stuff that we can agree on, and then we'll deal with the other stuff later. And it's an extraordinary generation. And the thing I'm most proud of in the campaign is that was the campaign where they got to take over, and then only 4 years later, they elected their own president. Because Barack Obama was elected more so than any other group by people under 35. African Americans turned out in enormous numbers, which I don't think was a big surprise. One of the bigger surprises was Hispanic voters turned out in enormous numbers and voted much more heavily for Barack Obama than people expected. But the biggest surprise by far was that the only election in my lifetime, including 2012, where more people under 35 voted than were over 65. That's an extraordinary thing. And it was there. So Barack Obama is their president. And why? Because he's like them. He's multicultural. This is the first multicultural generation in the history of America. He went to Washington, genuinely believed that he could bring people together. I told him, if you think that, you're making a mistake. I said, Washington is 15 years behind the rest of the country. They don't get it, and they're going to go down and they're completely ruthless. He looked at me like I was crazy. I think he believes me now. But so this new generation has a very different vision of how the world works. And I travel a lot now, because I'm on some boards of international democracy building organizations. I spend time in Ukraine, Albania, Moldova, all the Southeast Europe hotspots. It's all over the place. Kids are completely different. I was in a coffee house in Kiev not too long ago. Kiev is the nationalist pronunciation. This is a partisan statement about which side I'm on in Ukraine. And it was like Berkeley in the 60s. It was, you know, there was nothing there but books and a coffee urn and a hell of a lot of laptops, which wasn't like Berkeley in the 60s. And all these kids, they completely get it. They're Democrats with a small d. They totally get their obligations to each other. They're communitarians. I mean, I think conservative and libertarian aren't going to mean anything in this next generation, because they're both libertarian and communitarian at the same time, and it's just an extraordinary generation. And so there's still some of you here who actually were there during the campaign, and were 23 during the campaign. I won't say how old you are now, but if you add 10 to 23, I'm still looking for the girl who was topless at the Bryant Park March, which we didn't discover until we saw a photo weeks later. So it was a little like Woodstock, I guess. But it was a great campaign, and DFA was what came out of it. And this struggle continues. And that was a lot of fun, and I've made a lot of funny jokes about it. But it is a struggle that goes on every day. And when you think you're having a bad day and the world is falling apart, you got to get out of bed the next day and make sure it's better. And that continues for a while. And some days you're going to have losing days, and some days you're going to have winning days. So the stuff that is going on and the races that you're in now matter a lot. And the local, one of the great things I like about all the DFA chapters is the heavy emphasis on the local races, because that in fact is where, you know, stuff doesn't get really done in Washington. It comes from the bottom, and then stuff gets done in Washington because they see what's happened and it works someplace. whether whether it's solar energy or whether it's gardens and vacant lots in Brooklyn or whatever it is, that stuff starts at the bottom. And that's so critical that the campaigns for people like assemblies and city councils, that stuff matters a lot. And those are the races that DFA and DFNYC or DFNYC is really in, and I appreciate it. And I'll close, and then we'll just have a short Q&A until Tracey cuts me off, which she's threatened to do. I'll close by just saying one thing that is sort of a good maxim for, I think, all age groups. About midway through my 20s, during the permanent sparring match which every father who has a son recognizes, I was finally sort of cast off some of the chains of having a very strong-minded father. And we're having a discussion one day, and he said, I still have one advantage over you. And I said, what is that? And he said, I can look backwards as well as forwards. And at the time I thought, oh yeah, bupkis. But in fact, obviously I didn't think it was bupkis, because I'm repeating the story 40 years later, right? So I've thought about that a lot now that I'm on Medicare. Of course, it was disability. I'm really still only 25. No, but I've thought about that a lot, and I talk to young people a lot about this, and I think it's something that we ought to consider. When you get discouraged and you think you're having a bad day, it is a bad day, and you want it to get better, but you don't think it ever will. And I can remember those feelings during Vietnam and so forth. 40 years ago, when I matriculated at college in 1967, it was 1967-68, I had two African-American roommates. Neither of them had ever been to school with a white person before. They went to segregated schools in Memphis and Charleston, South Carolina, and I had never been to school with a black person before. That was 40 years ago. This was the year, as you will remember, that Martin Luther King was assassinated, 68. Bobby Kennedy was assassinated. The Chicago Convention picked a backroom candidate who hadn't run a single primary after the place was shut down and there was a police riot going on outside. It was pretty difficult days for America. And if you'd asked any of us at that time whether there was going to be a black president in 40 years, we would have laughed you out of the room. 40 years later, Barack Obama wins. Twice, which is actually, I was thinking about that this morning. The second election was almost more affirming than the first. Now, why is that an important story? Because 40 years when you're 65 is 2/3 of your life, and it seems like it's pretty quick. When you're 20, it seems like it's forever because it's twice your lifespan. So when people, the younger you are, what we need from young people is impatience, because we're old and we don't have so much energy as we once had. But we need a tremendous amount of impatience. But what we need from people our age is wisdom. That is, we want to encourage their impatience. We want to remind them that in fact it does get better, and it's getting better faster and faster, not slower and slower. So even in really horrible times, like all the things all over the Middle East that are going on, and the Ebola virus, and all this terrible stuff that's going on in the world, in fact, things are getting better. It's hard to believe when you read the papers this morning, but it is true. And if anybody ever really gets discouraged, there's a book which I hate to say was written in a small institution in Cambridge by a guy named Steven Pinker, who's a professor, and it's called something like The Nature of Our Better Angels or something like that. It's incredibly dense. It's like Hegel, and I'm not talking about the Secretary of Defense. But it's an extraordinary book, and it basically shows that over a 5,000-year history, in fact, though the press is getting more adept at laying out all our sins, which makes it discouraging. In fact, there's a lot less violence than there used to be. And politics, I actually discovered after the fact that this had been said by a well-known military strategist named Clausewitz. But my paraphrasing of it, without having ever read Clausewitz, is that politics is a substitute for war. 400 years ago, the resource allocation decisions that we were making and the power succession decisions that we were making were all made by violence of one sort or another, usually with an enormous number of people being killed. Today, we have this political process. It's very tough. It's nasty. People try to cheat, even in the United States. Rich people try to get more than their share, even in the United States, even in a great democracy. But it is much, much better than the system we used to use, where huge numbers of people were killed, which is a system that still exists in some parts of the world. It is getting better. But it doesn't get better because we hope it's going to get better, because we think it's getting better. It gets better because every single day, every single person in this room does something to make it better. And coming here and writing a check is a big something. Getting on the phone and talking to your friends is a bigger something. Going door to door is an even bigger something. And that's how it happens. And every single voice, in fact, does add up. And now that we have the most potent organizing tool that's been seen on the face of the earth ever, it adds up a lot faster. So keep it up. I'm not asking you to have faith. What I'm asking you is to work your ass off so we can win. Thank you.
Governor Dean has a little bit of time to take some questions. On that note, I do want to say we have the Hot Races project up on our website, Hot Races 2014. Who's seen it? I know you guys have seen it. So every year, a room full of people talks to us about all the races going on in the New York metro area. It's really hard to digest. And but we have a great volunteer, Mark Johns, who's here tonight, and Johnny Walker, another great volunteer. That's actually his name. Who've been working on getting those races up on our website so we can see what's out there. I also want to say that Mark Johns got married yesterday.
Hey!
So that's been a really important thing. You're going to get a lot of emails from a lot of different groups saying, come volunteer, come give your money here. It's hard to sort out which are the competitive races, the ones with an inspiring Democrat. Betsy Malcolm is here. I want to point her out. Betsy has been going out for Dave Denver. So real quick before questions, when I've noticed that a bunch of us, and I've been working with you guys for a long time, the Spiker sisters are here, Jenny and Christy. I've known them since the beginning. And Tim Wu is here. Tim Wu's running for lieutenant governor. And he's
Father of net neutrality is one of our big issues.
Yes, one of our big issues. So I just want to get this very quickly, but we've noticed that when you want to go volunteer for a campaign, there's probably 4 issues that you're looking at. How inspiring is 4 values? 4 values. How inspiring is the candidate, right? It's much more fun to knock on doors for somebody you really like, not just somebody who has a D in front of their name. Okay? How significant is the race? We'd rather sort of take back Congress or the state Senate than work on an assembly race. And there's another, and what's the likelihood of winning? Because we'd like to work on a race where a candidate can either win or can make a really significant statement by running. And then the 4th thing is a factor I like to call schleppability, which I'm hoping will become part of the political lexicon, but that's like, how far do I have to go to do this? Now, there's going to be phone banks right in here. Please take a handout. We're going to get these to you guys before you leave tonight. In fact, let me move this over here and somebody, Hilda, sorry, I can start.
Make up society.
Hilda Clausen, also who I've known since the D campaign, said, can start passing those out. So there are phone banks in this room every Wednesday. There are phone banks in Central Park. But Betsy Malcolm is working for Dave Denver out on Long Island, a terrific candidate for state senate. So it's not mutually exclusive, this inspiring candidate and schleppability, because once you know that Betsy Malcolm is really inspired by Dave Denver, and she's going to be at the Long Island Railroad Station at like 1:20 on Wednesdays or whatever it is, that district becomes a lot more schleppable for you. So just pay attention to our newsletters, because we're going to give you the candidates that fit like 3 of those 4 things, or maybe 4 of those 4 things.
Don't forget Michael Grimm.
Michael Grimm, yes, Dominic Recchi is running for Congress against Michael Grimm, very schleppable, and I believe Mark Johns is running on that race, because that's like right in New York City. So let me just point out that there's somebody I've known longer than all of you here, including my wonderful husband is here, Ilko K. Likely Democratic Party.
Ilko is the over the last 30 years, I have called Tracey and dragged her away from Ilko so many times.
Yes.
We owe a lot to Ilko. Okay.
Yes. Even longer than Ilko, Allison Dobrik is here because she saw something we put on Facebook. Where are you, Allison? I went to high school with this woman 21 years ago. Have not seen her since. But you can be friends with your high school friends on Facebook, and she saw this and she's here tonight. So, Allie, let's get. So now, a few questions. Who has a question for Governor Dean? Okay, right here, Laura Meyer.
A question about the media. I felt that the minute you said in your campaign that you wanted to have more diversity in media, that you were. I also noticed great interest that
hired this woman as a lawyer.
that when Americans are looking at overseas elections, part of the standards are to have a free and fair media. It was considered back in the 70s that American democracy was in great danger because there were only 75 media outlets. Now it's consolidated in the hands of maybe 4 or 5 Republican voters, 90% of it. What can we do about the media?
Well,
So
interesting.
Laura's question was about consolidation of the media, okay, and fair election.
Okay,
And the
so
need for diversity.
I actually don't think, with the exception of Fox, which I think most people understand is a propaganda organization, not a news media, not part of the news media, that I don't think that Republican bias is the problem with the media, and nor do I think that the corporate ownership of the media, which is really the big problem, leads us to bias in the media. I think there's plenty of bias in the media for other reasons. The problem with corporate ownership of the media is that it kills the media, because every piece of media becomes a profit center, and there's no reward for doing a good job in your story. You just want to do the sensational job, and as they say, I've heard this many times quietly, gee, that story is too good to fact check. And that's the stuff, that's the problem, because the pressure in the media is you don't get to write long form anymore. There are obviously some exceptions where they do extraordinary work, huge 3-page stories in papers, but there's a lot less of it than there was. However, this is one of the few areas where the free market works very well, because about 70% of people under 35 get their news from 2 sources. One is the internet, and the other is Jon Stewart. And the press is just, it's not just the newspapers. The newspapers have come under enormous pressure, as we've seen, and lost circulation and all that stuff. Cable television is now under enormous pressure. I just went out to buy a TV, and I wouldn't buy one unless it was hooked up to Wi-Fi. Now, despite my reputation, I already explained to you that the real brains in my campaign was the 23-year-olds, and I know not very much more than the next 65-year-old about technology, but I did know that television as we know it is going to be dead probably before I am, because people aren't going to care what the hell's on the evening news, because they're going to look around when they damn well please, and it'll be the news they want to look at when they get it. And so all that corporatization has actually killed what our generation thinks of as the media, but the young people are reinventing media whole form, simply be able to go on the web, which makes education, of course, 100% more important, because there's a whole lot of stuff on the web that's not true. So I do worry about the media because of their propagandist values, like Fox, which is just shameless and that could put Pravda to shame. When I took this great history course from a guy at Yale who was a former member of the East German Politburo, and he used to say, the Pravda lies in such a way that not even the opposite is so. And if you just take out Pravda and put in Fox, it's the perfect match, right? But I worry about that some, because people just mindlessly believe it. But I actually think we're going to fix the media ourselves, because the free market works, and we're going to create opportunities for young people who want to come up and do exciting things. Upworthy, for example. I don't know how many of you look at that every day, but it's kind of a collection of really interesting stories about the great side of human beings, which nobody seems to want to write about. And I do think that's going to fix itself. There are a lot of things that aren't going to fix itself. Wall Street's not going to fix itself, and it's a huge problem. Congress, we can have a hand in fixing, but it's going to take a lot of time. But the media, I'd actually think the free market of the media will eventually fix itself, because people don't want to watch the standardized crap that hasn't been innovative for 200 years, and the individual watcher has the ability, because of the net, to innovate for themselves, and the media is scrambling madly to keep up with it.
Okay, thank you. Another question for Howard Dean, right here.
Thank you. Dylan. You've underscored the importance of first globals in both your campaign and in President Obama's campaign from 08 to 12. How do you think we can make them impatient enough to turn out in a midterm? How do you think we get them to care about Congress?
Okay, that's a great question.
How do we get young people out?
How do we get young people out in the midterm? You can't unless you have something worth saying, and that's the problem. Politics in our generation was the way you got rid of people like Nixon. Politics in this generation does not is not interested in institutions. It's not that they don't trust institutions. It's not that they dislike institutions. They just think they're irrelevant, which is largely true. So unless you have a charismatic person who offers them a message that they believe is going to lead to fundamental change, they aren't going to come out for a party. I mean, we're all involved in politics, so of course, you know, I have a niece here who's 25. Of course, we're 6 or whatever. She's going to come out, and there are a lot of young people who like politics, and they get it, and they're all in Washington and Capitol Hill. But the whole generation is just not somebody who's moved by big institutions. They don't aspire to be a congressman or a senator one day. That's a problem for us, because politics is in fact the way we change things, and what happens in Washington does have an effect, and eventually free market of ideas will overcome them, but it's better to have it sooner rather than later. But the way to do that is to stand for something. The reason my campaign, I once overheard, I went on a cruise as a guest speaker for The Nation once, and I overheard this conversation. Somebody saying, yeah, you know, it's basically 500 donors to The Nation, and they trot out different speakers, you know. And I heard this conversation in one of the corners having coffee or something, and one guy says to the other, you know, we don't have any leaders in the progressive movement in this country. And the other guy says back, yeah, he said, yeah, you know, we all love Dean, but he's not really a progressive. He just tells the truth, which is why we like him. But that's all that's required. The truth is such a commodity, there's in such scarcity in politics. If only people have the balls to say what they think, it would be a welcome thing. And so that's what I think that is enormously attractive to young people. It's just somebody who will say what they think. That's why Rand Paul, who has this illusion of people think that he actually says what he thinks. They're now going to find out that he doesn't. But that's why he has a market among young people. And so I think one of the reasons that politics is a problem is because the politicians don't appear to be worthy of most people's time in a generation where there's a ton of other stuff to do.
I think that's a really good point.
And this is going to be the last one.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yes, Kristen.
Oh,
yes.
good. My husband's a doctor, New York City.
You got married? Okay, we'll talk about that too.
Maybe that was the last one.
We've been together for over 20
Okay,
years.
stand
He
up.
got a
Great.
kidney transplant. I did it for the money. I'm a hippie. He's fine. He's cool. Nonetheless, this is the whole Upper East Side private doctor world. They're all freaking out, and I don't blame them. There are new regulations. They're with cloud-based doing prescriptions and stuff. New York State is the only one that's going to make it mandatory that every single prescription has to be done over the internet, and it's cloud-based. It's not secure. And you know, I mean, there's a lot of different issues with Obamacare and et cetera. That's even irrelevant. But no one's talking about the perspective of the doctors. We're going to lose really good qualified doctors. You need 20 people in the office to take care of the paperwork now, and it's going to be even more. And it's not secure. It's cloud-based.
Okay, guys, the question from my dear friend Christy Spiker, who's now married, Mazel Tov, is about doctors that are having this issue that under Obamacare and other regulations with the keeping of medical records, that the records have to be uploaded to the cloud, and I guess there's a New York regulation about prescriptions have to be done over the internet, and they're concerned about this from a security standpoint and also from a personnel standpoint. Governor Dean, solve that problem.
So I'm going to give the 2-second answer instead of the minute answer. The 2-second answer is if you got rid of fee-for-service medicine and had a single payer, you wouldn't have all those regulations. Thank you.